His name was Janshay of Mulrimornes, and for a time he'd been a soldier, service done to repay part of a debt his father owed to the Merchants' Guild, and yet, in his regiment, beside the brothers he'd found there, against all horrors with steel bared, he'd found his place, till fouler powers contrived his disgrace. After 3 years of battles and bloodshed, chance took them all home to Mulrimornes. For 1 week they might see their kin, take their rest. But Janshay soon found himself under arrest by jubilant guardsmen who all but raced to the Guildhall to present his weathered face and claim the small bounty for his living head, to chain him with the debt of his father, now dead. Janshay learned at an hour-long trial that his father had taken work in the mines to try and keep up with the weekly payments, and his old body, by such hard labour rent, collapsed and lay in the dark till he died. Now the guild was incensed to have been denied their purses' fill, as by death or long miles this debt sat fallow for so long a while. They sentenced him to a life of slavery and took his tongue when he tried to resist. If his friends knew his plight and were dismayed, not a single one of them came to his aid. He was given no sign that he was missed, as to the deep mine he went with chained wrists, his father's pain to find, and such misery. Blue sky and sunlight, never more to see. For months he laboured, sure his release would come, that the city's baron would hear of him, and chastise well the unspeakable guild, or else the people would see the bastards killed, to avenge him and hundreds of such victims. Yet the days passed by, and his hope was dimmed, till he wished to die, and each day he spun a scheme to see some kind of freedom won. How simple it would be to start a fight, to take his mattock to the skull of some guard and by violence force the rest to cut him down, to end what was left of his life neath the ground. Each day he thought to do so, yet it was hard to make himself act. Some fool restraint barred his brain, and so trapped he stayed in his plight. Why could he not contrive one final fight? In his soldiering days he'd not once held back when he saw the faces of the monsters, to mark the teeth of some fiend new come from hell, who'd feast on an innocent if not quelled, gave no ground for the conscience to be stirred. Yet, in their own way, the guards also suffered. By the guild's scant pay they kept their dull shacks. A family would starve if a head he cracked. Yet how, after every injustice he'd known, every day of suffering in darkness, and even every battle come before, could conscience still presume to stand so tall? Would not the world grant him even that kindness, make him vengeful enough to scorn goodness, let his laugh be dreadful as he pictured the groans of a family left, by his hand, alone? It was sickening to be too weak to hate, to know such weakness delivered each new day in the darkness of the mine, brought each new crack of the whip across his bent and patchwork back. Thus on he went, earning his impotent dismay, while the guild of swine earned what his labours paid. Such pleasures to find, such revels to sate, if they were in reach, conscience might not grate. Release from the darkness did come in the end, though not by his hand nor by his cunning, but by the army's defeat 5 miles away, and the fiends who'd arrive at the end of the day. A young and fretful messenger came stumbling into the deep dungeon, an offer mumbling of freedom and pardon for all who descend to the surface and fight, when the beasts came to rend. Of the 73 hapless starvelings who were offered the one thing that could entice, not a one chose to remain in the mine, but all went to meet their fate and maybe find a glimpse of the sun, or one last merry trice for a sliver of vengeance or of vice, ere the hordes of horrors came butchering. With their thoughts held fast, most were soon rejoicing. They were led above in a chained procession and hurriedly taken to an arsenal, past the gawping eyes of drunk vagabonds and weepers whom despair had smote upon. The mood of Mulrimornes was dreadful, the absence of hope overt and total. By terror's sheer scope the expectation was not of battle, but obliteration. One by one they were handed half-blunt swords, or an axe whose haft would snap on the third swing. They were unfettered, so they could don the scraps of leather or mail which had borne attacks from blade, claw, and maw in battles past counting. Soldier as he'd been, Shanksy was soon seeing what the rest, new freed, could not, or else ignored. They were being sacrificed to the horde. Doubtless every free soul in the city was swarming to or through the farthest gate, whilst every convict or luckless debtor with such pitiful arms and armour were gathered, to form this awkward rearguard, then to wait, to buy time for the rest to flee, as fleshy bait here to die. And perhaps that was still mercy, yet they would still die as rich men's property. When the streets were emptied, they were left alone with the monstrous hosts 1 hour away. It was then that a one-eyed man did smile and bade his convicted kith wait a while and listen to the cheerful things he would say. Ere he was doomed for the rest of his days, hard labour to do, breaking endless stones. A smuggler he'd been, and such secrets he did know. In an old and unregarded storeroom, he'd bet his last eye that a tunnel remained through which the lot of them might swiftly flit, away from the city. Let the fiends have it. They could flee to the forests and there remain, form a gang of hoods and be the bane of any fool who would dare presume come near to those who had escaped their tomb. This idea met with an ugly cheer from all who gleefully followed their seeming saviour. What matter if the monsters tracked them down? What matter if in winter death lay found, for they would be tormented slaves no longer, and such hate-bolstered hope made them stronger, and each heart was stirred by dreams most dreadful. They would laugh to see Mulrimornes fall. And yet, that hardened heart Shanksy had sought deserted him at the sound of a child whose wails echoed in the evening air. She was doubtless alone and thoroughly scared, and all his malice that damned sound defiled, conjuring pity he had thought erstwhile. And so he did flee the friends and life he thought he'd wanted. There was one last kindness to be wrought. Incredulous shouts and jeers struck his back, yet his former fellows were soon out of sight, and he was alone except for the sound of the crying girl, whom he swiftly found, and whom he would try to keep safe from the blight, though to see a stranger drove her to flight, as if from the main she ran, and could not be tracked when she squeezed through a high wall's child-sized crack. So ended Shanksy's final sacrifice, the honourable deed for which he chose to die, for he could not follow the wolf's heads now, nor try to flee, lest the guards cut him down. No, against the monsters he must now vie, then about the streets in half-chewed pieces lie. Yes, now he would greet his honour's high price. Enough was enough, he would find peace in a trice. He did consider it, taking his blade, rusted and chipped though it was, and ending himself there and then. Surely a cleaner end than letting the monstrous hordes bite and rend. Yet like in the mine, for all his striving he could not do it. He would keep surviving to make his end fit the soul that remained. For the crying girl's flight, some seconds he'd gain.